The first red flag wasn't the lukewarm coffee in the break room or the funny little calendar mix-up that had my quarterly review rescheduled 3 times in a single month. It was the way our chief executive officer, Simon, with his smug-toothed bleach grin and hollow startup energy, called me Danny in front of the entire executive board. I had corrected him twice before. Still, he patted my shoulder like I was an overperforming barista and said my crew was on fire this quarter and to keep pumping. My name is Donovan Vance. I am 48 years old, and I had spent the last 12 years dragging Summit Nexus and its dead-weight sales department into the modern era. When I joined, their client management system was a glorified spreadsheet, and half the representatives thought lead scoring was a football stat. Now my 7-person team carried 65% of the fourth quarter core projected revenue. All signed, sealed, and delivered with multi-year contracts ready for renewal. I didn't do rah-rah speeches or trendy strategy boards. I built relationships, closed deals, and made my people feel like warriors in a corporate world obsessed with fake metrics and hollow emojis. We had just landed a massive $5 million deal with a major healthcare logistics client that could have easily gone to our biggest competitor, Vanguard Solutions, and yet Simon still treated me like a departmental mascot. Meanwhile, my team was buzzing with genuine excitement. Wyatt had hit 170% of his quota. Maya finally got that impossible breakthrough with the automotive vertical she had been chasing for months. Even our junior representative, Toby, had brought in a lead so hot it practically smoked on the desk. Everyone was whispering about the upcoming bonuses, not in that naive manifestation journal kind of way, but with real, calculated optimism based on hard numbers. Someone said they saw the chief financial officer, Monica, ordering an expensive second bottle of wine during last week's investor dinner. Someone else swore Simon mentioned record-setting rewards during his off-site leadership debrief. I didn't count chickens before they hatched, but even I allowed myself one dangerous thing. Hope. Hope that maybe, for once, genuine hard work and revenue generation would be seen, counted, and properly rewarded. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect luxury watches or rooftop champagne celebrations, but a performance bonus was explicitly written into my contract. That was pure numbers, math, and legally binding logic. For all his smoothie brain slogans, Simon had signed off on my compensation structure when I renegotiated my terms last year. And I had the receipts, the emails, the memos, and even the internal chat thread where he explicitly typed that we would properly reward success this time. So, I let myself exhale a little. I booked my team's favorite local bar for a low-key Friday evening happy hour. I ordered new ergonomic laptop stands out of my own pocket to replace the wobbly ones in our section of the floor. I even joked with my wife, Clara, about using my bonus to finally fix the haunted garbage disposal in our kitchen that growled like a dying raccoon. But underneath it all, under the complex spreadsheets, the high-stakes client calls, and the late-night crisis management, something was gnawing at me, a subtle rustle in the corporate bushes. The chief operating officer, Elias, started asking weirdly granular questions about our specific sales dependencies. The human resources department had randomly audited my team's paid time-off logs without telling me, and someone accidentally copied me on a vague email chain about leadership resource optimization. Still, I told myself it was paranoia, burnout, too much cold brew, and too little sleep. Besides, they wouldn't be that incredibly dumb. Not when I held the keys to their entire revenue engine, right? The Friday of the massive all-hands meeting, I wore a dark navy suit. Not for drama, it just made me feel grounded and solid. My team sat near the front row, joking quietly among themselves about what kind of gift cards they might get as a supplementary thank you. Maya said she was manifesting airline miles. Wyatt wanted a rare bottle of bourbon. Toby said he would settle for anything that wasn't another branded water bottle with the company logo peeling off. Absolutely no one was ready for what came next. Simon swaggered onto the stage like he was about to announce a massive public offering, not deliver a gut punch to the people who kept the lights on. He clicked to the final slide of his massive presentation deck. Big bold letters filled the screen. Of course, teamwork tastes better with pizza. Then he said the words that would ultimately destroy his own company. Your bonus this year is a pizza party. There was a heavy, suffocating silence in the room, followed by scattered, confused laughter from the back rows. I didn't laugh, neither did my team. Wyatt stared directly at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. Maya blinked rapidly, her expression completely blank. Toby looked like someone had just canceled every holiday for the rest of his life. My stomach dropped straight through the floor because, in that precise moment, I knew this wasn't an administrative mistake. This wasn't some awkward phrasing or a rollout delay for the real compensation. It was entirely deliberate. A knife slid into our backs with a gleaming, toothy smile, and for the first time in 12 long years, I felt something deeply dangerous settle behind my ribs. It was not disappointment. It was not confusion. It was pure, unadulterated revolution. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the specific way Simon delivered them. He sounded like a frat brother announcing the winners of a drinking game, not the trusted leader of a company that had just posted its highest revenue since its inception. "Let us celebrate everyone's hard work," he said. His arms spread wide like he was blessing the entire room. And what better way than with some hot slices and good vibes? I didn't move a single muscle. My spine locked into place like a steel beam. Forced chuckles echoed around the room, those hollow, instinctive office laughs that happen when absolutely no one wants to be the first person to call out the absurdity. Maya leaned over to me, whispering, asking if this was some kind of sick joke. I didn't answer her. On stage, Simon was still talking. He said that this year they believed in shared success, which meant investing in team bonding, rather than just handing out checks to the usual overachievers. He literally made air quotes with his fingers when he said overachievers. Someone actually clapped. Probably one of the new interns who still thought corporate culture meant anything other than a cheap distraction from fair pay. I slowly scanned the room. Elias, the chief operating officer, was typing aggressively on his phone, avoiding looking at the crowd. Monica, the chief financial officer, was watching me with the exact same expression you might give a stray dog behind a thick glass door. There was no eye contact, no human acknowledgement, just that careful, calculated sidestep people make when they know they are actively participating in a massive betrayal. My blood began to buzz. My team wasn't stupid. They were looking to me now, not to Simon. Wyatt had his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the prominent vein in his temple throbbing. Toby had slumped down in his seat like his entire posture had instantly deflated. Maya's eyes were glassy, and she was blinking entirely too fast. These were the incredibly dedicated people who had spent the last 6 months pulling 12-hour days. They had canceled family vacations, ran software demos from grocery store parking lots, and took frantic client calls during their family holiday dinners. They didn't want shiny medals. They didn't even need confetti. But they deserved something real. Acknowledgement, genuine respect, fair compensation, and instead, they got cheap pepperoni Dominoes. Simon slapped the microphone playfully like a cheesy game show host. He told the crowd not to worry, that there would be options. Meat, veggie, gluten-free. He actually said they knew how hungry everyone was after such a big win. I wanted to walk up those steps and shove that microphone straight through his expensive veneers. Instead, I sat very, very still. Blind rage didn't help in situations like this. Rage would only cloud my thinking. I needed absolute clarity and cold calculation. I needed to remember that this wasn't a one-time slight or an oversight. This was the final culmination of a long, deliberate campaign. The red flags had been subtly flapping for months. Ignored performance reviews, mysteriously withheld commission breakdowns, budget approvals that got inexplicably stuck in the legal department for weeks. I had repeatedly told myself to be patient, to be the ultimate team player. Now I realized they had been preparing for this soft sabotage all along. They wanted to downplay the wins, muddy the financial numbers, and cut my department off at the knees without ever actually saying my name out loud. Simon had just made it official policy. He even tried to add flair, acting like this was all part of some benevolent master plan. He actually winked at the crowd and said, "Pizza was better than inflation-busted gift cards, right?" The room chuckled again. Not louder this time, just significantly sadder. I turned my head slowly toward Elias just as the pathetic applause limped into existence. He was whispering something quietly to Monica. Both of them glanced quickly at me, then immediately darted their eyes away. My hands were perfectly steady, even though my heartbeat was a rapid metronome in my throat. I didn't smile, and I didn't frown. I just calmly memorized their faces, taking mental screenshots for future evidence. The meeting awkwardly rolled on with dry department updates, terrible graphs, and more hollow talk of corporate synergy. No one on my team took any notes. Neither did I. What I did instead, right there in the middle of Simon's wildly inflated sales projections slide, was open my phone. I scrolled through my inbox until I found a specific email. The one from Patricia, the vice president of sales at Vanguard Solutions, the aggressive rival firm that had tried to poach me late last summer. The subject line had read, "When you are ready to be treated like a true partner, not an accessory." I had purposefully left it unread for months. At the time, I genuinely believed loyalty still meant something valuable. Now my thumb hovered over the screen. I pressed reply, but I didn't type anything yet. Not yet, not here, not in this miserable room full of liars, thieves, and cowards. No, this absolute disrespect deserved surgical precision. I would happily bury them with a calm smile. I would let them toast with their cheap pepperoni slices while I planned the greatest corporate heist of the century. One thing was absolutely clear to me in that moment. If this was going to be a war, I had already won the very first battle. They just didn't know it yet. The legal column on my yellow notepad was the most critical piece of the entire puzzle. I could not afford a single misstep that would allow Simon or Monica to drag me or my team into protracted litigation. I reviewed my employment contract 3 separate times, analyzing every single clause and subclause. Then, I had my brother-in-law, a highly experienced corporate employment lawyer based out of Austin, review the entire document. The non-compete clause was certainly in there, buried on page 14, but it was largely toothless. It only covered currently active, signed clients, and the restriction only lasted for a period of 90 days. More importantly, I had hard evidence in writing that my team technically reported directly to me as an independent sales director, not to the company's centralized operations department. But I needed something stronger than just a weak non-compete. I needed a legal weapon that would completely paralyze them if they tried to retaliate. My brother-in-law found it in the amended compensation structure Monica had quietly pushed through HR last quarter. He pointed out a glaring issue: the way they had altered our commission payouts without formal, documented consent constituted a clear breach of fiduciary duty. They were intentionally manipulating the financial metrics to siphon money that rightfully belonged to the sales team back into the general executive fund. Furthermore, the supposed digital signature on the newly updated policy acknowledgement form linked to my profile was highly suspicious. I had never signed it, which meant the entire revised compensation agreement was void ab initio, invalid from the very beginning due to fraudulent execution. They had practically handed me the exact legal leverage I needed to completely destroy their leverage. Next, I opened my professional networking profile and quietly updated my status to indicate I was open to new strategic growth opportunities. I didn't make a flashy public announcement. I simply sent up a quiet flare to the industry. Within 24 hours, I received 4 direct messages from aggressive recruiters and an invitation for coffee from a former colleague who now ran a massive division at a financial technology firm. Still, I didn't jump at the first opportunity. I tested the waters with my own people. I casually asked Wyatt if he still had a secure local copy of our massive new client onboarding playbook, just in case it inexplicably disappeared from the shared cloud drive. He confirmed he had 5 separate backups. I casually mentioned to Maya that I had heard some rival companies were offering highly flexible quotas and actual profit-sharing models. Maya responded bitterly that profit sharing must be a nice perk for people who actually work somewhere that has a sense of corporate shame. Toby got a subtle test as well. I asked him, purely hypothetically, if he had ever considered relocating his career for the right opportunity. He looked at me with those earnest eyes and said he would only move if he got to follow a manager who actually gave a damn about his future. Loyalty. Absolute, unwavering loyalty. It was right there in front of me. The only wild card was my team's individual risk tolerance. They were incredibly competent and hungry for success, but they also had real-world obligations. Mortgages, massive student loans, aging parents. Toby's father was currently going through expensive medical treatments. Maya was single-handedly supporting her younger sister through a private university. Wyatt had newborn twins at home. I knew with absolute certainty that I could not lead these people into a financial freefall. I wouldn't push them to jump until I had personally built a secure landing strip for every single one of them. Vanguard Solutions was entirely on board with my plan. Patricia, their vice president, scheduled a highly confidential off-the-books call with her human resources director and their lead legal counsel. The terms were incredible. They agreed to a full buyout of my entire 7-person team, effective immediately upon our resignation. They offered substantial salary bumps across the board, generous signing bonuses to cover any lost commissions, and guaranteed that our existing client territories would remain preserved. They even threw in a remote-first work policy with full autonomy. No Elias micromanaging our pipelines. No Simon handing out cheap pizza in lieu of hard currency. But this deal was only valid if I gave the final word. I didn't. Not quite yet. Instead, I meticulously built the blueprint for a synchronized mass resignation. I drafted individual resignation letters, each perfectly templated but slightly personalized, with staggered sending times down to the minute. I prepared client transition emails that would automatically fire off exactly 30 minutes after the public announcement. The final crucial piece was the timing. I scrolled endlessly through my cluttered inbox, past Elias's latest demanding messages about synergistic team alignment, until I finally found the target. The next quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning. The agenda prominently listed a segment titled "Celebrating Our Fourth Quarter Wins." It was almost too perfect. I smiled tightly for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a large smile, just enough to finally taste the impending revenge. Let them plan their little victory lap and order their sad pepperoni slices. I was staging a calculated walkout that would leave permanent scorch marks on their first quarter revenue forecasts. The human resources response regarding my missing commission finally arrived early Tuesday morning, tucked neatly between a mundane newsletter and a company-wide invitation to sign up for a virtual wellness seminar. The email was from a junior representative named Shelby. It read, "Thank you again for your inquiry. After reviewing the performance and compensation policies, we have determined that all payouts align perfectly with our internal equity guidelines. Let us know if you would like a brief refresher course on how discretionary metrics are applied." Discretionary metrics. That was corporate doublespeak for stealing my money because they felt like it. I stared at the email while stirring my coffee, the metal spoon clinking sharply against the ceramic mug like a warning bell. Equity guidelines? My team had drastically overperformed by every single measurable standard in the industry. We possessed metrics that would make any sane executive weep with joy. There was absolutely no gray area here, unless, of course, they were intentionally fabricating one to justify their theft. Later that same afternoon, Elias's name lit up on my screen. The subject line made my teeth grind together. Quick note regarding team collaboration. I opened it cautiously. He wrote that he just wanted to offer additional support as we evolved into the next phase of team synergy. With that in mind, he had instructed a junior analyst from the business development pod to heavily shadow me for the next few weeks. He claimed it was to help out with transition strategy, knowledge sharing, and totally normal operational stuff. The analyst he mentioned was an arrogant, inexperienced kid who had once asked during a high-stakes pipeline review if gross margin meant the money we made before taxes were taken out. They were deliberately planting a spy directly in my department. This wasn't professional support. This was a soft demotion wrapped in the suffocating glitter of team building. I didn't reply to Elias. I silently forwarded the email to my secure private account, permanently deleted it from my work inbox, and completely cleared my digital trash folder. My eyes didn't twitch. My jaw didn't clench. I was completely past fury at this point. I was cold now, as cold and unforgiving as dry ice. That evening, I received an anonymous text message from an unknown number. It simply said, "Check your final compensation sheet. You did not get what you earned. Look for the clerical recalibration clause. Ask Monica." The tip was entirely legitimate. I immediately pulled up the latest commission document, hidden deep within the internal system. It was now masked behind a complex redirect link and suddenly required a secondary password, which it never had before. Once I bypassed the security, I scanned the final totals, $45,000. That number was completely wrong. I had the raw data, the hard math, and the signed contracts putting my quarterly commission earnings closer to $77,000. I rigorously triple-checked the contracts, the specific client close dates, and the massive deal sizes. Every single row of data confirmed my suspicion. Monica and Simon had effectively shaved my earned pay by nearly 40% under the guise of a clerical recalibration. I could vividly imagine Elias saying those exact words out loud with his signature weasel smirk, acting as if the phrase was a magic spell that instantly absolved him of grand larceny. They weren't just trying to demoralize me anymore. They were actively trying to erase my contributions. And still, I didn't react. I didn't scream, and I didn't forward the stolen numbers to my team in a fit of rage. I simply added the document to the legal file. The trap was fully set. I rehearsed my final speech in my dimly lit garage. Not in front of a bathroom mirror, not in my comfortable home office, but wedged tightly between a stack of heavy storage boxes and a dusty workbench. It was the only place in the entire house that felt as cold, isolated, and quiet as I needed to be. I stood directly beneath a single bare bulb, holding a heavy wrench like it was a presentation clicker, and repeated the words over and over again. I want to start by thanking the incredibly dedicated people who made the fourth quarter possible. Pause. Pivot. Look directly at the camera. But gratitude without actual integrity is just cheap lipstick on a massive lie. Each time I ran through the lines, I trimmed a superfluous word, shifted a subtle inflection, and cut every unnecessary syllable until the delivery landed like broken glass wrapped in a velvet glove. I absolutely did not want to sound angry. Anger was far too easy for them to dismiss as bitterness. I wanted to sound utterly inevitable, like a fundamental truth they had always known, finally being spoken aloud in the sterile corporate air. My brother-in-law reviewed absolutely everything one last time. My formal resignation, the team's official offer letters, the specific non-compete carve-outs, the encrypted data backups, and the massive logs of email evidence. Everything was completely clean, legally unassailable, and brutally surgical. His final reply to my secure message became my favorite phrase of the entire ordeal. He wrote, "There is zero liability here, just noise." I genuinely liked the sound of that statement. Let them scream into the void. Behind the scenes, I meticulously assembled the final explosive payload. Every single component was lined up in a perfect, devastating sequence. First, the client transition documents were polished and made comprehensive. Every single major account was mapped out in extreme detail, with primary points of contact, upcoming renewal dates, open service tickets, and warm introductory emails already drafted for Patricia at Vanguard Solutions. I left absolutely nothing sloppy. There were no burning bridges and no bitter sarcasm in the files. Every document dripped with an unsettling level of professionalism, so impossibly clean that it would sting like a calm breakup text from someone who had clearly already moved on weeks ago. Next came the critical customer emails, completely pre-written in my personal client management system and set to automatically send exactly 30 minutes after my impending public announcement. Each message was warm, highly confident, and carefully phrased as an exciting new opportunity for their business, not a chaotic departure. I knew the clients wouldn't panic. They would pivot and follow me, because I had already spoken to every key stakeholder personally and privately. It was all verbal, leaving absolutely no digital trail. They all knew exactly where I was headed, and they were quietly waiting for the signal. And then, the final resignation letters for my team. They were highly customized, with their specific effective dates pre-reviewed and approved by the legal department at Vanguard Solutions. They were perfectly timed and sequenced. The first one would fire exactly 5 minutes after I left the podium. The next 6 would follow in rapid 3-minute intervals, falling like heavy dominoes, striking like thunderclaps. Each letter was just as concise and ruthless as my own, effective immediately. Future correspondence may be directed to my private email. Thank you for the opportunity. There was no explanation, just a synchronized mass exodus. Friday morning finally arrived. I dressed incredibly deliberately. I wasn't flashy, just sharply professional. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a solid dark tie. No flashy accessories, just heavy presence. Clara watched me from the kitchen counter as I poured my coffee. She told me I looked remarkably calm. I nodded slowly and told her that was because the hard part was already done. I drove myself to the office, parked in my usual assigned spot, and walked into the building like it was any other ordinary Friday. No one noticed the slight shift in my demeanor. Not yet. At 4 minutes before 10 o'clock, Simon took the massive stage in the main auditorium. He was practically radiating smugness, cracking a terrible joke about the previous quarter's record revenue and claiming that sometimes massive success is the absolute best kind of surprise. My phone vibrated heavily in my suit pocket. The automated system confirmed my resignation email had successfully sent, exactly at 5 minutes past 10. Sharp. I waited patiently, letting him finish his completely empty, buzzword-filled monologue. I listened to the hollow, practiced clapping that echoed across the room when he finally finished. Then Simon smiled widely and said, "Let us hear from the man who helped make it happen. Donovan Vance, everybody. Let's give him a hand." The applause swelled slightly. I stood up slowly, buttoned my suit jacket, walked calmly to the front of the room, and picked up the microphone. My highly anticipated 5 minutes officially began, and Summit Nexus's entire financial future simultaneously ended. Simon genuinely thought he was just handing me a microphone to boost his own ego. In reality, he had just handed me a lit match while standing completely soaked in gasoline. The entire meeting was being live-streamed to the remote offices, of course, because nothing screams authentic corporate leadership quite like watching your chief executive pace around a stage while humbly bragging to hundreds of employees. Simon stood proudly in front of his massive presentation deck, like he had just won a prestigious award for spreadsheet formatting. He proudly announced that it was the biggest fourth quarter in the company's entire history, his fake modesty practically dripping off every single syllable. He praised the record renewals and the new industry verticals, claiming we did it all together as a family. He even had the audacity to tap the massive screen behind him, revealing a cartoon pizza wearing sunglasses. Scattered, highly uncomfortable laughter rolled through the room. Simon chuckled into his microphone, declaring that while revenue feeds the company, corporate culture feeds the soul. Then he winked directly at me and told me to say a few words about what teamwork really means. I stood at the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and began speaking in a slow, completely composed voice. I started by thanking my incredible team. I told the room that I wasn't thanking them just for their performance, although it was undeniably extraordinary, but for their unwavering integrity. I highlighted how they worked late nights, sacrificed their weekends, and hit every single impossible goal this company placed in front of them. And they did it all without cutting corners, without complaining, and without ever demanding a single thing more than what they rightfully earned. You could physically feel the air pressure in the room begin to change. The silence suddenly carried a massive weight. I continued, my voice entirely unshaken, stating that recently I had come to realize that integrity is not always a two-way street in this building. I clearly stated that sometimes the people cashing the massive checks don't respect the people actively writing them, and that loyalty, when blatantly unreciprocated, simply becomes another word for corporate leverage. Simon's trademark smile was completely frozen on his face now. Monica, the chief financial officer, was suddenly completely engrossed in her phone. I looked directly across the room and declared, in a voice that echoed loudly through the speakers. That effective immediately, I was formally resigning from my role as sales director. Several loud, stunned gasps erupted from the middle rows. I raised my hand slightly to pause the murmur and added, "But I will absolutely not be leaving alone." I turned my head just slightly, making direct, unbroken eye contact with every single member of my team sitting in the front row. I announced that every member of my core sales division had also resigned. I explicitly stated that as of exactly 5 minutes ago, we had officially accepted senior positions at a major competitor who actually values the revenue we bring to the table. We would all be starting our new roles on Monday morning. I paused for one single devastating beat. Then I leaned slightly closer to the microphone and clarified that those record-breaking fourth-quarter wins they were all just celebrating, the $22 million in projected revenue, that massive pipeline was built entirely by us. I told them those were our clients, our contracts, and our relationships, which we were now legally taking with us. The massive room was now so incredibly silent, you could hear the subtle hum of the projector fan. Even the notoriously loud intern in the back was completely frozen in shock. I finally turned slowly to look directly at Simon. There was no smile on my face, just cold, calculated precision. I leaned into the microphone one last time and said, "Your cheap pizza party just cost you $22 million. Then, very calmly, I placed the microphone down on the podium. I didn't drop it. I didn't throw it in anger. I placed it gently, like leaving a final, massive receipt on a dinner bill that someone else would be choking on for months. I turned and walked slowly down the center aisle. I walked right past Elias, whose face had drained of so much blood he looked like he might actually disappear. I walked past the human resources director, who was already frantically typing on her laptop, and straight out through the heavy double doors. Right behind me, the first automated resignation email hit their internal servers, then another, then another. The massive dominoes were finally falling, and the lit match had just touched the fuse. They didn't even make it to the catered lunch. By the time the confused delivery drivers wheeled in stacks of cheap pizza boxes, the entire room had already detonated. Simon's voice audibly cracked over the speakers as hundreds of phones buzzed, emails pinged, and nearly half the front row stood up and walked out in perfectly synchronized silence. It was like watching all the oxygen get violently sucked out of a pressurized airplane cabin. By noon that day, the company's internal communication system was an absolute graveyard of locked channels and heavily panicked threads. The Human Resources Department sent out a completely tone-deaf company-wide message claiming they were working on exciting internal growth opportunities. It fooled absolutely no one. By the late afternoon, 5 more employees from adjacent departments had voluntarily quit on the spot, deeply inspired by what they had just witnessed. Our loyal clients had already begun directly emailing Vanguard Solutions, completely bypassing Summit Nexus. They weren't angry or confused. They were just actively transitioning their accounts and signing new paperwork. At exactly 5 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, the board of directors called an emergency lockdown meeting. Simon desperately tried to spin the massive loss, blaming poor internal communication and claiming they could easily rebuild the pipeline. The chairwoman of the board reportedly raised her hand in the middle of his frantic sentence and coldly asked where Elias was. No one in the room had an answer. By the following Monday morning, my former department at Summit Nexus was functionally dead. There were 7 completely empty desks and 1 burnt-out printer. Meanwhile, 14 floors up and 3 miles across the city, I unlocked the heavy glass door to my massive new corner office at Vanguard Solutions. I had a real wood desk, a stunning view of the skyline, and absolutely zero cartoon pizza in sight. My team was already thriving. Wyatt had already landed a massive new contract. Maya was confidently leading a cross-functional training session. Toby walked into my office carrying a new premium laptop and told me they gave him a welcome package that included a luxury massage voucher. He joked that he almost cried in the parking garage. I didn't throw confetti, and I didn't gloat. I just calmly unpacked a single-framed photo of Clara, placed it squarely on my new desk, and turned my chair toward the expansive window. The city skyline didn't look any different, but I certainly did. True leadership isn't about protecting a corporate title. It is about protecting the people who actually build the empire. And sometimes it requires burning the old empire to the ground to prove it.